The golden lights of the Crystal Palace banquet hall in Accra shimmered like stars as Ama floated down the aisle in her diamond-studded gown. Guests clapped, cameras flashed, and her new husband Kwame beamed with pride. It was a wedding designed to impress. Imported roses, a 7-tier cake, and a live band flown in from South Africa. Ama had finally secured the life she always dreamed of. But beneath her polished smile, Ama's pride simmered. She couldn't help remembering her ex-husband, Kofi, the man she once scorned as a broke mechanic. As she clinked champagne glasses with her bridesmaids, she sneered, "I wonder if Kofi can even afford to rent a suit to attend this wedding." The laughter from her circle was cruel, echoing through the decorated hall. Guests exchanged whispers, some shaking their heads. They remembered how Ama once lived humbly with Kofi, back when his hands were stained with grease and his pockets were nearly empty. She had left him for wealthier prospects, and now, standing beside Kwame, she looked victorious. But just as the master of ceremonies raised his microphone to begin the evening speeches, a deep rumble filled the skies. The chandeliers quivered. Everyone froze, staring upward as the unmistakable roar of a jet engine thundered above. The sound grew louder until the walls trembled. Outside, onlookers rushed to the open terrace. Above the city skyline, a sleek white private jet emblazoned with a golden crest descended gracefully toward Kotoka airstrip just a mile away. Gasps echoed through the hall. "Who flies into a wedding like this?" a guest whispered, stunned. Ama smirked, adjusting her diamond tiara. "Maybe a minister, or even the president's entourage," she bragged, already preparing to claim the moment as a political honor. But a nagging unease stirred in her chest. Moments later, the screech of tires outside signaled the arrival of a convoy. 4 black SUVs with tinted windows rolled up to the venue. From the first vehicle stepped bodyguards in dark suits and earpieces. The air shifted. This was no ordinary guest. The last SUV's door opened, and out stepped a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit. He removed his sunglasses with slow precision. The hall erupted into hushed whispers as faces recognized him. Ama's painted smile faded instantly. It was Kofi, the broke mechanic she abandoned years ago. Ama's champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Kofi's presence at her wedding felt like an insult from the gods. The man she had mocked, dismissed, and humiliated now stood tall, commanding the room as if he owned it. Her new husband leaned in, confused. "Who is this man, Ama?" Kwam's voice was low but urgent. He had noticed the tremor in her hands, the sudden shift in her demeanor. Ama forced a laugh, waving her hand dismissively. Nobody important, just an old face from the past. But her voice cracked, betraying her fear. Around them, guests raised phones, recording every second of the unfolding drama. Kofi's eyes locked on hers, his lips curling into a smirk. He walked closer, each step echoing in the silence. When he finally reached the couple's table, he leaned just close enough for her to hear. "Congratulations, Ama. You traded your soul for glitter. But not all that glitters is gold." Before Ama could respond, Kofi snapped his fingers. From behind him emerged 2 women, tall and breathtaking. One was Ayana Mensah, Ghana's most famous supermodel, her face known across international billboards. The other was Naomi, a celebrated philanthropist and UN ambassador. Diamonds sparkled on their wrists as they glided into the hall like queens. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Guests abandoned their seats to take photos. "Is that Ayana Mensah?" one shouted. "And Naomi." "But how?" Another guest whispered, "They're with Kofi?" The murmurs grew into a frenzy. Ama's face turned pale. For years she had dreamt of being part of such elite circles, but now those women stood beside the man she had labeled worthless. She tugged at Kwame's sleeve, her hands clammy. "This can't be happening," she muttered under her breath. Kofi raised a glass of champagne handed to him by an aide. He looked directly at Ama as he spoke. "To new beginnings," he said smoothly. The toast wasn't for the crowd, it was for her alone. Ama's mind spiraled into the past. She remembered the night she left Kofi, how he had saved money for months to buy her a small gold necklace for her birthday. She had thrown it on the ground, sneering, "What use is this trinket when I deserve diamonds?" That night, Kofi had begged her to stay, promising that his inventions would change their lives. She laughed in his face. Dreams don't feed bellies, Kofi. I need a man who can give me the world, not grease-stained lies. Now, standing in her luxury gown, she realized that the dreamer she mocked had become a man whose every move drew admiration and envy. The contrast tore at her pride like claws. Kofi leaned slightly closer, his voice calm but sharp. Do you remember what I told you, Ama? That tomorrow is pregnant with secrets. Tonight, the child is born. Long before the private jets and flashing cameras, Kofi had lived in the shadows of grease and broken engines. Every day he toiled at his roadside garage in Osu, fixing old taxis for men who could barely afford his services. His overalls were torn, his hands rough, his wallet always empty. To Ama, this was failure. To Kofi, it was survival. Yet hidden behind those oil-stained days was a restless mind. Kofi kept a notebook filled with sketches of machines, diagrams of engines, and ideas to transform transportation in Ghana. While others saw him as just a mechanic, he was quietly dreaming of electric vehicles and smarter transport systems. Ama laughed whenever she saw him scribbling. Do you think you're the next Elon Musk? She would mock, tossing his papers aside. Each insult cut deep, but instead of breaking him, they became fuel. So the day Ama left, Kofi made a vow beneath the dim light of his garage. If she wants gold, I will build a mine. If she wants diamonds, I will own the earth they come from. One day, Ama will know what she threw away. Back at the wedding, Kwam's fists clenched tighter with every whisper from the crowd. He had married Ama believing she was pure, graceful, and loyal. But now, as her ex-husband stood in the hall commanding more attention than the bride and groom combined, doubt seeped into his heart. Who is this man really? Kwame pressed again, his voice rising above the murmurs. Ama avoided his gaze, her chest tightening. She knew if she told him the truth, that she had abandoned Kofi for money, Kwame's pride would crumble. Kofi, noticing the tension, turned to Kwame with a slow smile. You think you know the woman beside you? His tone was smooth, dangerous. You don't. She once sold love for luxury and she will do it again. Today you are her prize. Tomorrow you may be her stepping stone. The words cut deep. Kwam's face stiffened as whispers spread faster. Ama felt her wedding unraveling, not because of what Kofi had, but because of what he revealed. Ama's mind couldn't resist the memory. She had stormed into their one-room apartment, her designer bag packed, her heart cold. Kofi had just returned from the garage, covered in grease, holding a small box. Inside was a gold necklace, thin but precious to him. She laughed bitterly. This is what you call a birthday gift. Do you know what Kwame bought his girlfriend? A car. And you think this cheap chain is enough for me? Her words were knives, deliberate and cruel. Kofi had stood frozen, his pride shattered. Ama, I don't have much, but I have dreams. Stay with me, and I'll build us a future worth more than gold. His eyes burned with sincerity. But Ama spat on the necklace, dropped her bag at the door, and said her final words. Dreams don't pay bills, Kofi. I refuse to rot in poverty with you. She walked out, never turning back. Until today, the irony of it all burned in Ama's chest. Tonight, Kofi hadn't shouted. He hadn't cursed her. He hadn't even demanded revenge. His silence was louder than any insult she once threw at him. The quiet confidence in his eyes mocked her more than words ever could. Guests stared at him with admiration, while their eyes on Ama brimmed with pity and judgment. Even her bridesmaids whispered among themselves, forgetting their loyalty. Every second of silence felt like a knife twisting in her heart. Kofi raised his glass again, not toward the bride and groom, but to the guests. To patience, he said, and to the kind of love that doesn't change when money is low. His words struck like thunder, leaving Ama's image crumbling further. Ama's hands shook so badly she dropped her napkin. But worse than her trembling was the fact that she knew, deep inside, that Kofi hadn't even begun to reveal his full story. Just as the crowd began to settle, Kofi snapped his fingers again. One of his aides stepped forward, carrying a black leather folder. He placed it gently on the couple's table. The sound of the clasp unlocking was louder than the music itself. Inside were crisp documents, each stamped with international seals and golden crests. Ama's eyes darted across them in horror. ownership deeds, hotel chains, patents for innovative engines, all under Kofi's name. His empire was bigger than she ever imagined. But one document made her knees weaken. It was the deed to the Crystal Palace banquet hall, the very mansion where her wedding was taking place. The family property Kwame had bragged about actually belonged to Kofi. The guests gasped, some even rising from their seats. Ama's world spun. Her dream wedding was happening on the property of the man she abandoned, the man she once called worthless. Kofi looked at her calmly and said, "Welcome to my house, Ama." Kwame's jaw tightened as he stared at the documents. His cheeks burned not just with humiliation but with fury. "Ama," he whispered harshly, "you told me this hall was secured by my family. How is it under your ex-husband's name?" His voice cracked, and the entire hall seemed to lean in to hear her response. Ama's lips trembled. She tried to force a smile, but her voice came out uneven. "Kwame, I didn't know. Maybe it's a mistake, a coincidence." Yet even as she said the words, she knew they were lies. The truth sat across from her, smirking behind a champagne glass. Guests pulled out their phones, filming every moment. The wedding that was supposed to be her grand triumph had become Accra's biggest scandal, live streamed through whispers and videos. Kwame's face darkened with rage. Kofi leaned back in his chair, speaking only to Kwame. "Do not be angry with her. Ama has always had a gift, making palaces out of lies, until the truth arrives to tear them down." The murmurs around the hall grew louder, like waves crashing against stone. "So Ama's broke ex is actually a billionaire?" one woman whispered. "Aye, this life," said another. "See how pride has disgraced her." Some guests chuckled openly, their eyes filled with pity for Kwame and contempt for Ama. Others admired Kofi's composure, the way he didn't raise his voice, yet silenced the entire hall with his presence. Phones buzzed with messages as the story spread beyond the walls. Ama could feel the weight of every stare. The same people who once praised her beauty now looked at her with mockery. Even her bridesmaids avoided her gaze, pretending to fix their makeup or whisper among themselves. For the first time in years, Ama felt small. The dress, the diamonds, the venue, all meaningless now, because the one thing she had tried to bury her past with Kofi had risen to bury her instead. The memory of the night Kofi left her returned like a ghost. She had woken to find his side of the bed empty, his notebook gone, his tools missing. The garage was locked, his phone switched off. He had vanished without a word. Neighbors whispered that he had fled Accra in shame, running from her insults. Some claimed he had gone mad, chasing dreams too big for his pockets. Ama never cared. She was already entertaining men like Kwame, men who showered her with gifts and promises. But Kofi hadn't run away. He had gone underground, disappearing into networks of entrepreneurs, inventors, and risk-takers. His silence wasn't defeat, it was strategy. While Ama laughed with her rich lovers, Kofi was quietly rewriting his destiny. And tonight she realized the truth. Kofi had returned not as a mechanic, but as a king. Kwame's temper finally snapped. He stood, slamming his fist against the table. "Enough of this nonsense. This is our wedding. We don't need your theatrics, Kofi." His voice thundered, but the tremor beneath it betrayed fear. Kofi rose slowly, towering above him. His voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of authority. "Theatrics? Kwame, do you even know who your wife truly is? Or the lengths she went to climb into this dress beside you?" The room held its breath. Kwame turned sharply to Ama. "What is he talking about?" Ama shook her head frantically, tears threatening to fall. "Don't listen to him, Kwame. He's just bitter." But Kofi reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. He opened it to reveal the broken gold necklace he had once given Ama, the one she spat on years ago. "Sometimes the past refuses to stay buried," he said coldly. The sight of the necklace broke Ama's defenses. Her knees buckled, and she clutched the edge of the table for support. Whispers grew into gasps as the bride of the hour looked less like a queen and more like a prisoner of her own past. Kwame's face twisted with disgust. "Is this true? You humiliated this man and left him for me?" His voice cracked with disbelief. He had prided himself on marrying a woman of class, but tonight her secrets were unfolding like rotten fruit. Ama tried to speak, but her words dissolved into sobs. For years, she had walked on heels taller than her conscience, but now the ground had finally given way beneath her. Even her groom began to edge away, ashamed to stand too close. Kofi leaned forward, his tone still calm. "Ama, you left me for wealth. Yet here you are, drowning in shame while I stand free. Tell me, was it worth it?" Kwam's patience had snapped like a brittle branch. He shoved the table aside, the plates crashing to the floor. "Ama, you humiliated me in front of the nation," he roared, his face flushed with fury. His pride, carefully crafted over years of wealth and image, now lay in shambles before hundreds of eyes. Ama reached for his arm, desperate. "Kwame, please. I didn't know this would happen. He's just here to embarrass me." But her trembling voice convinced no one. The truth had already poisoned the air. Kofi remained composed, his silence louder than Kwame's rage. He simply sipped his champagne and watched as the man who stole his wife unraveled before his eyes. He didn't need to fight. Ama's choices were fighting for him. The guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing that this marriage was already collapsing. Some pulled out phones, whispering, "This wedding will trend by morning. Ghana hasn't seen a scandal like this before." At last, Kofi placed his glass down and stood tall, his gaze sweeping across the hall. "Since the truth refuses to remain silent," he began, "let me share my story." The guests leaned in, hungry for the revelation. He told them how, after Ama abandoned him, he left Accra with nothing but a backpack, his tools, and his notebook of sketches. He wandered from city to city, sleeping in workshops, begging inventors to give him a chance. In Kumasi, he met a group of engineers who believed in his vision for electric vehicles. Together, they built prototypes, selling them to small transport companies. Investors mocked them until one European billionaire noticed their designs and poured millions into their work. "Today," Kofi declared, "our vehicles move across Africa. My company, K-Tech Motors, powers governments and corporations. The same hands Ama once mocked for being dirty with grease now shake presidents and kings." Ama's eyes filled with tears as Kofi's words washed over her. She could barely breathe. The same man she had mocked as useless was now wealthier and more powerful than anyone she had ever dreamed of marrying. Her body trembled, her pride crumbling faster than the makeup melting on her cheeks. She stumbled toward Kofi, clutching his sleeve. "Kofi, please, I was young, I was foolish. Forgive me. We can start over. Everything I ever wanted." "It was always you," the crowd gasped. A bride begging her ex-husband on her wedding day. It was unthinkable. Phones recorded furiously, capturing every desperate plea. Kwam's face twisted with horror as he watched his bride cling to another man. But Kofi gently removed her hands, his voice calm but firm. "Ama, I forgave you long ago, but forgiveness does not mean return. You left me when I had nothing, and now that I have everything, you think you can crawl back. My heart does not work like your pride." Kwame could no longer contain his rage. He grabbed Ama by the wrist, yanking her away from Kofi. "You disgusting liar," he spat. "I thought I married a queen, but you're nothing more than a greedy fraud." His voice shook with humiliation. Ama tried to plead. "Kwame, don't do this here. Please." But before she could finish, he threw her wrist aside and stormed toward the exit. The crowd parted, their eyes wide in disbelief. Kofi watched in silence. He hadn't come to destroy Ama's marriage, but it was collapsing all on its own. Ama stood alone in her gown, abandoned at the altar not once, but twice, once by love, now by pride. Her sobs echoed through the hall. The guests whispered from bride to beggar, all in one night. But Kofi knew there was still one final truth Ama hadn't faced. As the hall descended into chaos, Kofi raised his hand. Silence fell once more. "There is something none of you know," he said, his voice carrying across the room like thunder. "This is not just about betrayal or wealth. This is about destiny." He pulled out another folder, thicker than the last. Inside were adoption records, property files, and a DNA test. The documents revealed a shocking truth. Kwam's family business, which Ama had married into for wealth, had secretly been purchased months ago by Kofi's company. The guests erupted in disbelief. "So Kofi owns everything, even Kwame's empire?" Someone shouted. The realization struck Ama like lightning. Her marriage had been built on a foundation already owned by her ex-husband. Kofi's voice remained steady. "Ama, the life you chased was always mine to give. You mocked me for being a mechanic, but the joke is on you. You didn't just lose me, you lost the world I built." Ama collapsed into a chair, her veil slipping from her head as tears smeared her makeup. Just hours ago, she had stood proudly as the center of attention, basking in glory. Now she was a broken spectacle, her humiliation broadcast across every phone screen in the hall. Guests whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "From riches to disgrace," one man muttered. She thought she won, but see how life turns. The murmurs were brutal. "Aye, she left him as a mechanic, now see who he is," one guest said. Another shook their head. Pride is a disease. Their judgment wrapped tightly around her, suffocating. The shame wrapped around her like chains, heavier than the diamonds around her neck. Her bridesmaids, once her loyal entourage, quietly slipped away, unwilling to share in her downfall. Even her parents sat frozen in their seats, unable to defend her. For Ama, it felt like the entire world had turned its back on her. Kofi watched quietly, his eyes neither gloating nor pitying. To him, this wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. The woman who had once spat on his dreams was now choking on her pride. Outside the hall, journalists and bloggers had already gathered, tipped off by buzzing phones. News vans parked, cameras rolled, and within minutes, headlines spread across Ghanaian social media. Billionaire Kofi crashes ex-wife's wedding, leaves bride in tears. Inside, guests whispered updates they were seeing live on Twitter and Instagram. Ama's disgrace wasn't confined to this room, it was spreading across the world in real time. Memes, captions, and hashtags already mocked her story. Ama realized this wasn't just humiliation, it was permanent. No amount of wealth or influence could erase this digital stain. Her once envied name was now trending as a punchline. Her chest heaved with sobs, but even her tears were no longer private. Phones zoomed in, capturing her every breakdown. She was no longer the bride of the hour, she was the scandal of the century. Meanwhile, Kwame sat in his car outside the venue, his chest burning with rage. For him, the humiliation was too much. His empire, his reputation, and his new bride all ruined in a single night. His pride demanded someone to blame. He lit a cigar with shaky hands and muttered to himself, "Ama tricked me. She played me for a fool. But Kofi, he set me up. He knew what he was doing." His jealousy grew into obsession. In his mind, he wasn't the victim of Ama's lies, he was the victim of Kofi's power. And for men like Kwame, humiliation could only be washed away by revenge. His eyes narrowed as he whispered, "This isn't over." Back in the hall, Kofi knew the look on Kwame's face when he stormed out. He had seen it before, the look of a man who couldn't accept defeat. A storm was coming and Kofi was ready. Ama, broken and desperate, staggered back to Kofi. Her voice trembled, echoing across the silent hall. "Kofi, please, don't let this be the end of me. You once loved me, doesn't that mean anything?" She dropped to her knees, clutching at his suit. The sight shocked everyone. Ama, who once called herself too good for him, now begged like a beggar in front of hundreds. The irony was unbearable. Kofi gently pulled her hands away. His voice was firm but calm. "Ama, I did love you, but love is not blind, it sees clearly even in pain. You left me when I had nothing. You don't deserve me now that I have everything." Kofi's face softened but only slightly. He pulled her hands away gently and shook his head. "Ama, love does not return to where it was betrayed. I forgave you long ago, but forgiveness is not the same as a second chance." The hall erupted in murmurs again. Ama's sobs filled the silence. The girl who once mocked Kofi's dirty hands was now grasping for them, only to be pushed away with dignity. Kofi turned from Ama and addressed the entire hall. His voice was deep, steady, and commanding. "Let tonight be a lesson. Pride can destroy faster than poverty. Faithfulness is more precious than diamonds. And those who mock small beginnings often bow to greatness later." The hall erupted in applause, some guests even rising to their feet. Ama covered her face in shame, wishing the floor would swallow her whole. Every clap was another nail in the coffin of her pride. But Kofi wasn't finished. He glanced toward the exit where Kwame had disappeared. "And as for the man she chose," he paused, letting suspense hang heavy. His empire was already mine before this wedding began. Pride built on borrowed wealth always crumbles. The hall was buzzing with chatter when suddenly the doors slammed open. Kwame stormed back in, his suit disheveled, his face twisted with rage. Security moved quickly, but he waved a pistol in the air, freezing the room in horror. Gasps echoed as guests ducked beneath tables, screams rising in waves. Amma shrieked, stumbling backward in terror. The groom who once promised her the world now looked like a desperate madman. He pointed the gun first at Kofi, then at her, his hands trembling with fury. "You ruined me," Kwame shouted, his voice cracking. "You both humiliated me before the nation. If I can't have my pride, no one will." The guests whimpered, some praying aloud, others too stunned to move. Kofi stood calmly, unshaken. His bodyguards inched forward, but Kofi raised his hand to hold them back. His eyes never left Kwame's. "Pride is killing you, Kwame. Put the gun down before it destroys more than just your name." Kwame's finger trembled on the trigger. Sweat poured down his forehead, his chest heaving as silence gripped the hall. All eyes flicked between him and Kofi, as if waiting for a spark to ignite an explosion. Amma crawled toward Kwame, sobbing. "Please, don't do this. We can fix it. We can start over." But her words only enraged him further. He shoved her aside, snarling, "You're the reason I'm standing here like this. You lied to me." Kofi slowly stepped forward, his voice calm, measured. "Kwame, I already own everything you think you lost. Pulling that trigger won't change it. But you have a choice. You can walk away with your dignity, or you can bury yourself in disgrace forever." The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Kwame's eyes darted nervously, his hands shaking more violently. The gun wavered, and everyone held their breath. Just as it seemed Kwame might pull the trigger, one of Kofi's bodyguards lunged, tackling him to the floor. The pistol slid across the marble tiles, clattering beneath the table. Screams turned into sighs of relief as security pinned him down. Amma stared at the scene, her tears blurring everything. She reached for Kwame, but he spat at her, his voice filled with venom. "This is your fault, Amma. You destroyed me." His words cut deeper than any knife. Kofi walked over, kneeling beside the broken groom. His voice was firm but not cruel. "Kwame, men are not destroyed by enemies. They are destroyed by their own pride. Tonight, you proved that." Kwame collapsed into bitter sobs as security dragged him out. The once proud businessman left in shame, his empire gone, his pride shattered. With Kwame gone, Amma sat trembling on the floor, her gown torn, her makeup smeared. She looked like a ghost of the woman who had walked proudly down the aisle just hours earlier. The guests whispered, some pitying her, most condemning her. She turned to Kofi one last time, her voice a broken whisper. "Kofi, please, give me another chance. I'll change. I'll love you for who you are now." Kofi shook his head slowly, his expression unreadable. "Amma, love is tested in the days of little. You failed that test when it mattered most. What you see now is the reward of faith, patience, and loyalty. Qualities you never valued." Amma collapsed into fresh sobs. For the first time she understood. She had not just lost a man, she had lost the chance to be part of a destiny greater than she could ever imagine. The hall was silent as Kofi raised his glass one last time. "Tonight was never about revenge," he said, his voice steady. "It was about truth, to remind the world that beginnings do not define endings, and pride will always destroy the ungrateful." He turned toward the entrance as Ayana Mensah, the supermodel, walked back in, this time holding the hands of quintuplets, small children. Gasps filled the hall. The quintuplets, dressed in matching outfits, ran toward Kofi, shouting, "Daddy!" Amma's scream echoed through the hall. Her world spun as she realized the ultimate twist. While she had mocked him as a broke mechanic, Kofi had found not only wealth, but also love and a family greater than anything she could ever give. Kofi lifted one child into his arms, smiling calmly. "This," he said softly, "is my true empire." The crowd erupted in applause, some in tears. And as Amma collapsed in despair, the story of the broke mechanic who became a king was sealed forever.